Thanks, David. You're right? Your slides are working, yes?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Whoops. Can you hear me? Yes, yes. Good to see you. It's my great pleasure to introduce David Karotkin. Many of you will know David in his role as national president of the Institute of Architects, which he stepped down of a week ago because it's a rotating temporary position. It's 2 years usually, or how long?
No, it's 1 year.
1 year. I always think 1 year is too short, David, to really implement too much. But anyway, so the Institute of Architects, which is very important for all of us, it's our institute, and the president of the institute, it's a role for 1 year. And so David has done this. It's the national role, so he spent a lot of time at the East Coast. David is also a practicing architect. He has an office here in the city, Sandover Pinder Architects. He's managing director of this office with 20 people. And a lot of the work David is doing with his office is public works, sports facilities, health facilities. He worked in China and Indonesia. We just spoke about the vertical hospital. Stacked 25-story hospital in Indonesia. He's also an alumnus from our school, from Curtin, which is fantastic. And he's going to talk 45 minutes on advocacy, design excellence, and architecture. Welcome, David Karotkin, please.
Thanks, Stefan. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I understand it's Folio Week. And so I know you're under a bit of pressure, so thanks for taking the time out. As Stefan mentioned, I am a graduate of Curtin University. I actually started my degree, my first degree at Waite, when it was still called Waite, in 1984. That's my student number up on the screen there. It's somehow, I'm really bad with remembering names and numbers, but that number is just embedded. So I must have used it a lot for something. After graduating from my first degree, which is a Bachelor of Applied Science, well, that's what it was, I took a gap year, travelled to the UK, worked for an architect for 6 months, and then spent another 6 months travelling around. Went to the States and into Europe. And then I came back to what had then become Curtin University, to finish and do my Bachelor of Architecture. And at that stage, actually the 4th year, we spent 4 days a week working in a practice, and 1 day, the Friday, back here on campus. So it was a pretty good model. I had the best part of 2 years sort of in a working environment, and then came back and did my 5th year full-time, and was able to really enjoy the experience. So I graduated in '89, then I headed back to the UK, spent a couple of years, 3 years in the UK working on just the one big project in the centre of London for Sir Robert McAlpine, a large construction company. Then I actually went to Israel and I worked for an architect in Tel Aviv for a year, before finally coming back to Perth, where I went and got a job with Banham & Associates, Gary Banham. His son, Teague, now runs that practice. And I was there for close to 4 years before joining Sandover Pinder. And I'm still there. So 20 years on, I'm still at Sandover Pinder, and I'm now one of 3 owners of the practice. Let's get this and make sure we're working. That's Sandover Pinder. And as Stefan said, we're sort of a medium-sized practice, doing mainly public works, schools and sports facilities. So it's a good broad range of project types. My history, let's say a representative history, actually did start at Waite. In 1986, I was the president of Waitasa. So that was the last year there was ever a Waitasa before it became CASA. Look, I didn't spend a lot of time on advocacy in that role, but we did throw a huge party at the beginning of the year, had advertised it around the campus, had hundreds of people come along. It was paid for, and we made a huge profit, which we were then able to spend through the course of the year running different events and the brown bag lectures at lunchtimes and so on. And whilst that's actually was quite a good way to kick the year off and to grow that kind of collegiality amongst the architecture students, and to kind of create a relationship between the School of Architecture and the rest of the university. At the time, you know, we were, and I guess it's probably still the same, you're kind of fairly isolated. It really is a school, unlike a lot of the other students that are moving from one building to another and mixing a lot with students doing different degrees and so on. We were very much a standalone school. So we enjoyed the opportunity to engage with the rest of the university, and that collegiality is really important, as I'm sure you all know, because support for each other as students, support for each other as professionals, and what that does is it better enables us to deliver as a student or deliver as a professional. And that support continues to be really important going forward. And I guess my role in the Institute is kind of consistent with that valuing of the support network. I actually joined the Institute as a graduate. In the early 2000s, I was seconded onto the chapter council. And then I actually became the chapter president in 2011, and that's a 2-year gig, that one, Stefan. But and it's pretty hard work actually being a chapter president, but I enjoyed it. And as chapter president, I'm automatically onto the National Council of the Institute as a director, and from there I was actually elected to become the national president, which is obviously a huge honour. And was very much unexpected. It certainly wasn't part of some kind of grand plan that I had. So I spent 1 year as President-elect, 1 year as President, and as of last Thursday I'm now the immediate past President. So I have 1 more year on the Council, so to continue the work that we're doing. So what am I going to talk about, or what's the theme of today's talk, and why have I selected that? Well, it's advocacy. I think I called it advocacy and architecture. It should really be advocacy for architecture. And what is advocacy? I'm sure you know. It's obviously the promotion or arguing for a proposition, for a cause, or for an idea. And for us as architects, broadly, that's about promoting the value of design and obviously the role that we as architects play in delivering quality design. The advocacy that we do obviously also is quite specific on occasions, and it targets issues that affect the quality of the built environment and affect our ability as architects to practice effectively, and that's important to all of us, of course. And the reason, I guess the reason why I think this is a theme that's relevant to speak to you as students is because it's really important that you understand that actually the role of the advocate is one that we all need to adopt. We all have to be advocates for architecture in everything that we do, all of the time. And I hope that by the end of today's discussion that you'll sort of understand why and understand how everything you do is actually promoting architecture. So who's our audience? Well, it's everyone, but I can categorise who we're really talking to in maybe 4 different categories. There's government, all 3 tiers of government, which is the federal, state and local governments, because they're the policy makers. They set up the policy frameworks around which we need to operate within. and they're also regulators. So clearly we need to be influencing them. Then there's what I call project sponsors. These are the people or the organisations that have a need that's a need for architecture. They have the means to initiate a project. So they're the people that are going to be starting projects, and we need them to understand the value of good design, because it's right at the beginning of the project that needs to be embedded in the program. Obviously, the community broadly, we want to educate the community about the value of design, because they're really the consumers of design, either by virtue of being engaging the services of architects or other designers, but more broadly, they're the users. They're out there, they're living in the built environment, they're operating in it, and so they're the consumers, and they're the ones that will create the expectations for what sort of quality of built environment that they want. So it's really, I guess, in an advertising world, you'd say they're the ones that create the demand, and we're the ones that will satisfy that demand as architects. And so we want them demanding the very best. By way of example, I suppose when we talk about project initiators or sponsors, I don't know how many times I've heard people talk about a project that they're involved with out in Welshpool, let's say. It might be a warehouse or a factory with some offices attached to it, and they've mentioned it in passing and said that it's not the kind of project where we'd need an architect. And it happens all the time, and it's this idea that somehow you only need an architect if you want to have a strikingly attractive looking facility. And it comes out of a lack of understanding of what architecture is, that idea of firmness, commodity and delight. So they understand the delight part. They don't understand the commodity and the firmness part of what we do as architects. As just talking about that example, if you consider these sorts of facilities, they're businesses. There are hundreds of people that work in that environment. Are they somehow less entitled to a quality work environment than those of us that work in the city or in the university? They're quite often process-related businesses. Think about how some level of efficiency that can be derived out of good design, how that then repays the sponsor through the life of that building through profitability and productivity. Their staff retention will be greater, the health of their staff will be enhanced. When you can good design can deliver adaptable environments, so as their business model changes, they can change within the building that they occupy. These are the things that we need to talk to our colleagues and our friends and our neighbours about when they raise these issues of, we didn't think we needed an architect, because it's about educating them. And ultimately, we want to build an army of people that actually understand and will pass on the message. And then the final category of people that we are advocating to, we're communicating with, is actually it's talking amongst ourselves, just like we are today, and just like we do at conferences and seminars, and even just when we get together as a group of colleagues. And that's actually really important, because it helps us to equip ourselves as advocates. We become better prepared when we presented with an opportunity to promote architecture and good design. And it also hopefully helps us all come together a bit more and to be on the same page, which can be quite challenging. Architects are an opinionated group of people, they're passionate, and it is certainly one of the challenges that we have at the Institute as a representative body as to how to represent such a diverse group of opinions. So the more we can come together, we can at least get a better understanding of our shared principles that we can then promote to others. So obviously, ultimately what we want to do is achieve something through our advocacy. And what is that? Well, obviously at government level, it's around influencing policy and governance frameworks. To the project sponsors, we want them right from the outset to value and to seek quality design outcomes. From the community, we want them to be educated to expect and demand quality. So when they're talking to their local government representatives and so on, they're demanding quality. Developers will respond to that as well. We really want them to be interested in design. You know, through their interest in design, they're going to engage. They're going to seek out better design, and there's going to be more dialogue around what good design really is. And we want to empower our profession to be effective advocates. So, how do we do that? If you start with the sort of policy makers, obviously we're really focusing principally on the three tiers of government. At a policy level, this is one area where really having an organisation, a representative organisation such as the Institute, is an effective mechanism for advocating to government. And at the Institute, when you think about what the Institute is, it's really about members. There's around 12,000 of them at the moment, about members coming together so that we can leverage our individual resources and capabilities in order to deliver maximum outcomes for us all. So what we can't really achieve on our own, we can pool our resources and hopefully achieve as a group, as an organisation. So as an institute, we do target certain policy positions in a proactive manner. We'll go out to government, particularly prior to the elections, and we'll promote our policy positions on issues such as education, housing affordability, sustainability, urban density, heritage. We've got a suite of around about 15 of those sort of fairly broad policy positions, and we put those out to government. And prior to an election is quite effective because we can do it as a questionnaire and seek responses, which we then share with our members, and it serves to help members make their voting decisions, but it also serves to get some form of commitment from whoever it is that might end up winning that election. So that's quite a useful time to target them. We also respond to calls for comments, which we're getting all of the time, typically at a state and territory level. And that's to do with regulations and planning policies and so on. And they all have an impact on either us as people working in the profession, or in the case of planning policies and so on. It's the framework within which we need to work and operate. And so we're clearly interested in quality built environment broadly, and so we want to have the best possible planning policy frameworks. And we also actually promote individual Architects Acts in each state and territory. So the Architects Act, which regulates our capacity to call ourselves architects, there's one in each state and territory of Australia. So it's not a national thing, not a single national act, it's an individual one in each. And we have to keep pushing to support that, because it seems that there's a regular cycle of government reviewing and looking for ways to maybe get rid of some regulations and what they're calling, cutting red tape. So we're very protective of the Architects Acts and the Architects Boards that regulate or that administer those acts. And we've also, one of our achievements in the last, I suppose, decade was that we managed to get, at one point, government architects in place in all of the states and territories. But we keep having to support and promote that position because, once again, that seems to be right at the... From a government point of view, they keep thinking that that might be an easy way to save a couple $100,000. We'll just get rid of the government architect. What do we need that role for? So at the moment we've got a couple of vacancies around the country and we have to keep pushing to make sure that they stay in place. And we're trying to get city architects as well. There's a city architect in the city of Perth, and we think all cities, as a threshold, should have city architects. So you've got expertise embedded inside the organisations that are making decisions around our built environment. One particular advocacy position that I've been pushing since my time as chapter president, and then in my role as national president, has been related to the Architects Act and regulation of architects. Many of you may be aware of a planning policy that exists in New South Wales called SEP 65, and it's been in place for around 12 or 13 years now, and it's specifically about apartment design in New South Wales. And it's a package, if you like, and it includes apartment design standards. It includes the requirement to use design review panels as part of the assessment process. It's a requirement to review design through the course of the whole project so that they don't just get it approved and then go off and change things later. And uniquely, it has a requirement that any apartment project that has either 4 or more dwellings in it or is more than 3 stories high has to be designed by a registered architect. And that, in Australia, is the only piece of legislation that exists that requires the use of architects to design buildings, which I find amazing and disappointing. If you consider in Western Australia, we have a Building Act that requires plumbers to be licensed, electricians to be licensed, even painters. If you do a commercial painting job that's worth more than $10,000, you have to be licensed. But anybody can design the building. And the fallback position seems to be that we'll keep putting in place more and more sort of design related approvals processes, which tends to set the lowest standard, the lowest acceptable standard, which then becomes the target standard for most developers. That's the requirement. We'll try and hit that, or we might even go a little below and just see how we go. There's no incentive to try and get the best possible design outcomes. And yet, as architects, as you know, we do 2 degrees, 5 years, a minimum of another 2 years of experience across the full spectrum of capabilities, supervised before sitting further exams to validate our proficiency. And then, even then, we have to continue to do professional development. We have to operate within a regulated environment. There's a system of recourse from our customers if we operate outside of those requirements. So we, as architects, as a profession, we commit ourselves to these things, and I suppose there doesn't seem to be any balanced you know, I guess at a personal level, there's no reward other than the ability to use the title of architect, and I guess to get out there and promote that to the community. But it doesn't seem to be offering up the protection when the community don't really have sufficient understanding to know why there's an Architects Act and why they should be using architects. So it's that idea of public protection. That's the reason the Act is there, but it's not really all that effective. That's my personal crusade, and we'll keep trying. Actually, about 2 years ago, the Minister for Planning put out a document calling for, I suppose, input into a second phase of planning reform, and we submitted and advocated for this sort of SEP 65 style of policies to be incorporated. And the good news is that it got onto what they call their agenda, so it's in writing now as something that they're considering. And the current minister is actually very supportive of the concept. He just needs to get it really across the line with regards to other members of the cabinet and so on. So the Institute, as I say, is about members leveraging. It's a leveraging tool for members, and ultimately, what we as architects want to do is to produce really good architecture, and the Institute is seeking to support our ability to do that. So we run CPD programs. We have a suite of practice tools and services that are available to our members. We run seminars and conferences and so on. And all of this is really in support of our capacity as architects to deliver the best possible architecture and design that we can. And if I had one message today around advocacy, it is that delivering quality architecture is the best advocacy tool that we have. So I suppose the Institute, in its role of support, enables us to deliver quality architecture. And so that, amongst all of the other things that we do, means that we're not just focused on advocating policy positions to governments and so on. We really are targeting the community, we're targeting project sponsors, and we're targeting the industry. And I suppose one of the biggest programs that we deliver every year is our awards program. And each of the photos that you're seeing up on the screen actually is from last year's, there are award winners from last year's awards program. We run the program in each state and territory, and then each of the award winners from those programs goes through to a national awards jury, and then we give out, I guess, the best of the best awards to the sort of national awards. Now, this awards program is about celebrating design excellence. It's a fantastic advocacy tool because it enables us to demonstrate the benefits of great design by really selecting the very best of the work that's been done over the last year or so. It tends to have a fairly high degree of media interest, and ultimately good design promoted in the public realm actually helps to recruit advocates, other advocates really from either our clients or from users. I'm sure many of you recognise Bread in Common down at Fremantle. That won a couple of national awards. And you know, I mean, there's no doubting it's got great bread, as in the name, great food. But look, it's a great environment, and people might not, you know, it might just go, might just slip people's minds that this is part of the formula that comes into creating a great cafe or a great restaurant. that there's actually somebody behind that. There's a designer, somebody's created that space, and it's all part of the whole package, the experience. When we give it an award and put it in the newspaper, there's a chance that people start to understand that and make the connections. It's great advertising for them. They get more people coming in, more people understanding the value that good design has brought to that. And so I've got, and this is big projects, little projects. Any project is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to deliver great architecture, and it's an opportunity to have a client and have users that are enlightened about the power of good design. And I'll just show you something that demonstrates that.
In this little village, and we are on a short list of the National Award. What can I say? What can anyone say?
We were really aware that it's a very sensitive site because it's in such a beautiful spot, and there's an old ugly duckling dunny block that was here originally, and it was always a bit of a bone of contention for the village. People sort of would say, gosh, that's an ugly toilet block, and the surf club was going to put something here. We were sort of a bit nervous in case we built something that was a bit ugly, and then we'd cop it forever and a day. So it was good. Jack sort of looked at it and said, yeah, look, I think we can do something.
The people who have been working at this for years had to convince the village that architects are good people. So it was a cultural journey to convince those people that having an architect actually would be good.
It's very functional and very practical, and I think also it's such a beautiful building to look at that really helps our cause as well. We sort of get a bit of reflective glory from that, and we're quite happy to take that. But it's really that's Jack, our architect's skill and ability that's allowed us to do that.
It's a little bit like, has become, psychologically speaking, a bit like a church, like the church that the village used to be. That's what comes to my mind, that psychologically speaking, the village almost sees that building with that perspective.
I think I just like it when it's full of the kids and the mums and dads are mooching around with a coffee on nipper mornings and the doors are all up. It's a very happy and joyous space to be in.
By little bits and pieces like this, or you make people realise and understand that you can go a little bit beyond the functionality of something and make it that your heart feels something. How much is it that worth? I ask.
Now, is that guy the best advocate that we have? He's unreal, isn't he? We need to put him on a tour. But that's just. I mean, that makes you feel good, for sure, as an architect. Tiny little project. It was the winner of the small projects category, but huge impact. And that's the opportunity that comes with every design project that we do. This is the mission statement from the Chicago Architecture Foundation. I don't know if any of you have been to Chicago, but this is what success looks like. Because I was lucky enough to go to Chicago last year, and the Architecture Foundation is a valued and high-profile organisation within the city, and it runs a whole series of tours and programs around the city. It's a huge tourist attraction. You can get on the ferry and do a tour on the ferry, or you can do walking tours and so on, and they're all hosted by volunteers, and as far as I'm aware, I think almost all of the volunteers are non-architects. These are just people that have a real sensibility for good architecture, for good design, and they love it. And they love their city. And they use this phrase, design matters, all the time. So I was sitting on a ferry, it was packed. And you know, it was like the punchline at the end of the tour, design matters. And it really, to me, that was an unbelievable sensation to think that there's a whole design culture embedded in this massive city, and what that really means. And it's sort of an aspiration of ours at the Institute. It's an aspiration of mine, just to be able to start to get a bit of sensibility within our community around why design is so important, and that in fact, you know, there's no such thing as anything being created without design. That's another thing that people maybe sometimes don't understand. If any decision that is made is by design. So you've got a choice. You can either get good design or you can get bad design. And we need to make people understand that getting good design is good value, and it's essential. A few more fantastic pictures from our awards program. Obviously, this is the program rewards projects that are typically, you know, the success of the projects that win the awards is almost always attributed to having an enlightened client. So the ability to deliver great outcomes relies on a client that kind of understands what's needed to deliver a good project. So there is a chicken and the egg thing there. You know, you need to bring your clients along with you. You need to educate them, but ultimately that's what delivers great projects. But there are other examples, I suppose, where maybe it's frustration, I'm not sure, but this concept of perhaps actually having architects lead from the front and actually create a project themselves. And the next little video I'm going to show you was also an award winner, but it's a project for an apartment for some social housing in the centre of Melbourne. Many of you may have heard of it, by Breathe Architecture, which is a very young practice. And they were not satisfied that the current paradigm, that developer-driven, profit-focused paradigm for delivering affordable housing, really was a workable solution, and it wasn't delivering sustainable, community-focused architectural outcomes. So they decided that they could actually come up with a better model. And once again, the proof is in hearing from the people that live and occupy in this space.
As soon as I saw that the typeface was hand-painted on the side of my door, I was like, well, someone's put that much care into this building. Like, you just don't see that on standard development projects.
Especially people who like use font and study font. I was like, that could be custom. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, so the person who has been working on this house
cares much.
All the way to that micro level. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, we're on the same wavelength with
this person, whoever this is. And then they turned out to live in the building.
Yeah.
I love my neighbours, I love the people that live here, I love the community aspect of things. I love that we live in a building where people know each other and we have a laugh and we say hi and, you know, we get to know about each other's lives.
There is beautiful design and there's beautiful fittings and features and all that, but essentially it's about how people live their lives and interact with each other, and I think this place has put that as its central sort of goal.
There's a bit of a gardening group going on that's been looking after part of the garden, so some of it is communal, some of it isn't.
You go up on a Sunday and there'll be some lady there and some dude just gardening, and I'll be like, I don't know how to garden. I'm like, so what? Tell me about carrots.
And you learn a lot about carrots.
Yeah.
So yeah,
we've got 2 hives up on the roof, and hopefully we'll get up to 100 kilos of honey this season if all goes well.
We opened the building at open house and had 800 people come through the building and inspect our apartments, and that sort of reminded you that, well, this really is an amazing building.
I think it is that shift from building something that's purely, I guess, for developers and considering how people want to actually live their lives.
It's showing people like developers, investors, town planning committees that you can actually put a vote in for something sustainable, something well designed, that's affordable, that has a minimal impact on the environment and fits within the community, that actually adds to the community.
I think it just makes everybody happier, basically. I find I'm just happier when I come home. I often just don't want to leave as much.
We'd struggle to ever move out, I reckon, you know, to live in a normal street where you don't know your neighbours. It'd be very hard.
Yeah, so that project's called the Commons. It was, as I say, it was initiated by the architects at Breathe Architecture, and what they did is actually recruited some other architects to help to fund the project themselves. So that was really a case of maybe if we can't, you know, in the current environment, maybe if we can't actually talk people around to delivering a completely different model for affordable housing, that we just need to get out there and find a way to demonstrate it. And it's a very proactive kind of concept, and it was very successful. You know, and it's driven by people that don't have a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. These are young, up-and-coming architects that just found a way to do it, and it was successful. And that group of investors who are other architectural practices and have now identified another site, and they've got this model where they're going to find one site at a time and produce a development and then they're basically going to hand over the design lead on a rotational basis in order to deliver these projects, which are, by the way, they're still intended to be profitable. It's not a charity, it's a demonstration. And you can see from some of the words there that it's been called the Nightingale Project, and it's about reimagining what social housing should be, and it not being driven by real estate agents that tell you need to have 2 bathrooms or you need to have 3 bedrooms, even though there's only 2 people living in the house. It seeks to, and it actually, the model is quite interesting. They seek to sort of extract superfluous features in order to then reinvest the savings into quality and into things that add quality, either from a materials point of view or from a spatial point of view. The success of the first project has meant that the moment they came up with the second project, it was oversubscribed immediately. Meant that they could get the security from the banks because they basically had a full subscription. And it's all happening. So it's a fantastic model, and we may well see it sort of start something that spreads to other states and territories. Quite inspirational, really. At a different level, the Institute actually took on a project, a demonstration project, an exemplar, and also in Melbourne, coincidentally. We own our offices in all of our states and territories except the Northern Territory, which is great. You know, it means we've got the security of our own property assets. In Melbourne, had a small building on the corner of Exhibition Street and Flinders Lane, so it's in the CBD, great location. The block, I think, is about 320 square metres, and it's on a corner, so it's pretty small. Had an old building on it that was beyond its use-by date, and we had to decide what to do. Are we going to sell and buy something else? Are we going to try and refurbish it? Or is there something bigger and better that can be done to this site that's both financially sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and I guess in an urban context is sort of culturally sustainable? And that's the decision that was made, was to develop the site. And we've ended up with a 21-storey tower on a 320 square metre block. and I'll just...
At the entry to Melbourne, one of the gateways into Melbourne, what better place for the Institute to demonstrate the epitome of sustainable building in an absolutely fantastic design.
It was really about connecting the Institute with the public.
It invites people in, and I think that alone is saying something important about the Institute, that we want to connect with the community.
It sort of talks about the integration of the Institute as an organisation, but it also talks, we think, quite powerfully about how to connect all of that back to the city.
It's about design innovation, sustainability, incredibly importantly, but also showing that commercial buildings, particularly ones, constrained ones like this in terms of a small site and so on, that they can also be innovative and sustainable and offer a lot more to urban life.
It is about the profession making a statement about what we value, what we think is important, and making sure that we're getting our message across not just by saying things to people, but by demonstrating what we believe.
I think members can feel proud that we've actually delivered a demonstration project which shows the value of architecture.
So if you're in Melbourne, go and check it out. It's got a, it's completely open to the footpath. It's got a bookshop, an architectural bookshop, and a cafe in it. So really good public interface. But once again, that's about really being proactive and taking an opportunity to demonstrate by way of developing an exemplar project. That demonstrates the power and the influence of good design. Obviously, what we do in advocacy is about developing the message and then getting the message out there. I was going to talk about social media. I'm no expert in social media, but clearly what it demonstrates is that there are plenty of avenues now to engage publicly. Engage amongst ourselves and to really get the conversation going, because and we need to keep up to speed with the way people are engaging, and certainly that's I guess a challenge at an institute level, and that's really where we require kind of individuals, members of the profession to step up and be involved and not sort of feel that I can maybe pay some membership fees to an organisation and just step back and expect everything to happen. It's not the nature of a membership-based organisation, and also, organisations and institutions are inherently a bit, they're not quite as responsive and as reactive as the modern world kind of requires us to be in an engagement environment. So I suppose, my concluding remarks really are around this idea that everything we do, as architects, as architecture students, people involved in the design professions, everything we do and everything we say is really part of us promoting and advocating the value that we bring. If we don't promote it, I guess from a self-interest point of view, we're going to be struggling to get our fair share of access to design opportunities. I explained a little earlier about the sort of work I'm doing at Sandover Pinder. It's been commercial work and public works with experienced clients and clients that know they need projects. But the other day I actually decided I'd take on a house project. I haven't done a house project for people probably 20 years. And it was actually a little bit confronting because and these are friends of mine, I had to sort of explain to them the value proposition. I haven't had to do that sort of for some time in that sort of environment. So before I can maybe convince them that perhaps I'm their architect and not some other guy down the road, the first challenge is just to convince them that they need an architect. They've got a great block and they want to develop a house for them to live in for the next 20 or 30 years. and that the best way to optimise that opportunity for them is to get good design input from an architect. But this is up against home builders, where they think perhaps that the design is all just sort of built into the price, and they get sort of price certainty and so on. So they need to sort of understand in the first instance the value that architects can bring to them, even before I might have to convince them to give me the job rather than someone else. So there's a certain degree of self-interest there, because we're interested in the opportunities of really contributing to developing a much better built environment for individuals and for us as a society, wherever we may end up living. So on that note, I might just put the final little plug in for the Institute, and then we can have a chat.
Across the nation. To the Australian architecture community. As a member of the Australian Institute of Architects, who is part of a network of over 11,000 members. Connecting you to what's going on. So to connect you to student competitions and prizes. Don't get your work out there. There's local events, national events, and skill development. Heaps of networking.